And guys, in this next news story, a Tinder match from hell who imprisoned a woman in her flat for 2 hours on their first date and strangled her has been jailed. Jordan Brooker, who is 22, was crying in court as he was jailed for 31 months over the offences against his victim, who he had been messaging for months before he turned up at her address. The victim was only saved after a neighbour heard her banging on the walls and begging to be let out. The prosecutor, George Joseph, said the complainant and the defendant knew each other from having met on the dating app Tinder. They messaged for a considerable amount of time, but the defendant had never met the complainant. Reading Crown Court heard that on January the 10th this year, Brooker had turned up at her home with another man whom she did not know. The three had stayed up until the early hours socialising, but eventually the woman had gone to bed. When she woke up for a glass of water around 4:30 in the morning, she saw the defendant rocking with his head down and hood up. The victim had checked on Brooker, but he grabbed a bottle of Malibu and smashed it on the floor. The victim asked the defendant to leave, and he said, "Who the fuck do you think you are talking to me like that? Nobody ever talks to me like that." He became aggressive and pushed the complainant towards the TV unit, and she hid in the toilet to compose herself. When the victim returned, Brooker had called her some nasty words and told her to sit the fuck down and do not move. The prosecutor said the defendant placed his hands around the victim's neck, digging into the neck with his thumbs, and the complainant described feeling pressure on her neck affecting her ability to breathe. The complainant felt that due to his behaviour, remarks and actions, he was going to kill her. The victim had threatened to cut herself in a persuade to Brooks to let her go on the court heard, but he told her, "Nah, I don't believe you." Brooker had broken the victim's phone and sat in front of the door of the flat so she could not leave, but at 6:30 in the morning, police were called to her home after a neighbour heard her banging on the wall shouting, "Let me out." In a victim impact statement, she said she was completely broken and traumatised by the incident, following which she has had to quit her job. She said, "I'm scared to go outside, even to meet with friends. I'm terrified of running into Jordan. Jordan knows where I live. I'm afraid, and although I and Jordan were not in a relationship, he will still try to come to get me." The defence of Brooker said he had been taking coke and alcohol and that his problems stemmed from substance misuse. Brooker attempted to read a letter which he had written to the judge, but he appeared to be overcome with emotion and said that he could not read and started crying. Instead, his defence revealed he expressed his remorse towards the victim and recognised that she deserves an apology. He added that Brooker had 10 certificates showing that he had completed various workshops whilst on remand in prison. He said, "The person who behaved in this appalling way and the person in the dock are quite distinctive people." Brooker admitted one offence of false imprisonment and one offence of intentional strangulation, and the judge who sentenced him said the victim was stuck in the flat, crying and scared for a period of about 2 hours. There is a clear connection between drug and alcohol use and your offending on this date, and that is an aggravating factor. The judge revealed that Brooker, who had 9 previous convictions for 11 offences, was breached in terms of a community order for which he had received for harassment in December 2022 and a suspended sentence. After the judge activated the suspended sentence term, he said that the total sentence for Brooker was going to be 31 months imprisonment. So guys, any of you lot going on these dating apps and trying to meet people, just stay safe because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And guys, in this next news story, a very dangerous man who had a fascination with knives and stabbed his housemate to death over a petty argument about his taste in music has been jailed for life after being convicted of the brutal murder. Sayyid Hussein Kazai will spend a minimum of 18 years behind bars before he can be considered for release. The killer became enraged during an argument about music preferences of the 19-year-old University of Hull student Sachin Hawkins, and the confrontation escalated into sudden violence. Hussein Kazai, who's 25, of Hull, denied murdering Sachin Hawkins, but he was convicted by a jury after a 7-day trial. He was wearing a grey t-shirt and he looked relaxed and completely unmoved as he was led away from the secure dock at Hull Crown Court to be taken down to the cells. The minimum period that Hussein Kazi has to serve will have 159 days deducted from it because of his time spent in custody and remaining that he has to serve a minimum of 17 years and 206 days. The prosecution claimed that Hussein Kazai stabbed Mr. Hawkins through the heart with a single blow with a 6-inch long knife that had been held high. Mr. Hawkins had been playing music and he was in the kitchen of their shared house when Hussein Kazai, who had been helping to tidy up, started making fun of his taste in music. They exchanged strong insults and they usually called each other names in jest, but this time the argument escalated and Hussein Kazai took exception to what he'd been called and asked Mr. Hawkins, "What did you just call me?" Hussein Kazai held the victim against the wall and stabbed him in the chest, causing Mr. Hawkins to fall to the floor. Another person in the house held Hussein Kazai back. Hussein Kazai said, "I need to go," before stepping over Mr. Hawkins and saying, "I'm sorry," before leaving the house. He later told police that he did not intend to cause any harm to his friend. They had actually met during their first year at the University of Hull. Mr. Hawkins was taken to the Hull Royal Infirmary, but he died that evening and Hussein Kazai was arrested nearby on suspicion of murder. Mr. Hawkins was an international student from the city of Freeport in the United States and he wanted to become a special education teacher. In mitigation for his client, one of the cases said that it was a tragic case for the family of Mr. Hawkins. The defense claimed that there was no intent by Hussein Kazai to kill Mr. Hawkins. There was no planning or premeditation sufficient to amount to an aggravating feature. Violence on this scale, if at all, was simply not contemplated. The violence was spontaneous and the defendant did not search for or indeed select a knife. Rather, it appears to have been, as the evidence suggests, close to. Judge John Thackeray Casey told Hussein Kazai, "You thought nothing of the unending pain you would cause to the family of Sachin Hawkins. The family of Sachin Hawkins now suffers that pain each day, his life needlessly taken. Whether or not you are released after the minimum term has been served for the parole board to consider after the end of that term, and the parole board would not consider that you can be released unless it is satisfied that you are not a risk to the public and are ready for release. You initiated trouble by being rude about Sachin Hawkins' choice of music, making, as you did, a comment which was homophobic. He responded verbally but with no threat of violence or intimidation whatsoever. Physically, he was no match for you. Mr. Hawkins was around 7 stone, but Hussein Kazai, you were 12 stone. You then viciously attacked him. First, you pinned him by the scruff of the neck to the door of the kitchen and then picked up a large kitchen knife. You plunged this kitchen knife into his chest with severe force, sufficient to damage bone and cause through and through injury to the heart before entering the lung. He quickly collapsed and mercifully lost consciousness. You made some brief efforts to assist him, but then left the house before the police and ambulance arrived. Judge Thackeray said Sachin Hawkins was adored by many and his life was precious and priceless to his family and friends. You have caused pain, suffering and torment, and they will never recover from the devastation that you have caused. Their lives are changed forever. There was an intention to cause really serious harm rather than to kill. The judge told him that was not the first time you had brandished a kitchen knife. Hussein Kazai had previous convictions for knife-point robbery and he admitted he had a fascination with knives. He said he did not recall threatening and chasing a female student with a knife during an earlier incident, but he admitted that she was likely to be telling the truth. On another occasion, he threatened her with a knife and waved it in her face, causing her to lock herself in her room out of fear and then stay the night with a friend. In another incident, it's believed he brandished or was in possession of a knife involving a different student. So I just want to say, rest in peace to the victim and my condolences go out to your family.
It's your boy GT. Keep it locked, keep it real.